Hello everyone, and welcome to week 5 of English 200. This week, we're going to start talking about fiction. It's our last genre. You guys have been doing great with creative nonfiction and poetry. This week, I'm going to introduce the next genre, which is short fiction. I'm going to give you 3 examples of short fiction from our book. Then we're going to talk about certain elements of fiction, including the parts of a story, characters, setting, and dialogue. There's going to be an assignment about getting our feet wet in short fiction. You're gonna do your first free write in short fiction. Then there's going to be your first writing exercise. You're going to try a facade, which is a model for writing a short story. Then do another writing exercise, which is called an iceberg, and that's another writing exercise. Then you'll revise one of those for your formal assignment. Your reading assignments are all from your textbook this week. We're going to be reading selections from the section on writing a short story, including setting the scene, creating characters, structure and design, and writing the short story. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about what the short story is. This is your last genre. The word fiction itself comes from the Latin to shape or fashion. So really think about it like you're molding something out of your imagination when you're writing fiction. Literary fiction is completely different from genre fiction. Many of you guys have probably read genre fiction like romance novels, mystery novels, something that it follows an actual format. And if you don't do what's expected in that format, then the reader gets disappointed. Like, for example, in romance novels, the two characters fall in love but face struggles they can't be together, and then in the end they finally get back together, right? An example of a romance novel is 50 Shades of Grey, okay? In mystery novels or or not science fiction, but in mystery novels, there's always a crime that has to be solved, and there's many obstacles, right, that the characters go through. But in the end, the mystery is solved, okay? Literary fiction is not based on any of these expected arcs. The idea is that craft is used, just like in poetry. Craft is used in order to develop round, strong characters that we relate to, that are human and have flaws, and it's about the actual craft of writing the story. So we're going to talk a little bit more of that. But that's one of the biggest lessons to learn in a class like this, is the difference between writing genre fiction and writing literary fiction. So there's a lot of elements to fiction. There's the structure and design, which is basically the plot. That's what happens and what caused those things to happen. When you're writing a short story, especially the short stories we're going to be writing for this class, you want to keep it simple. You want to have one single conflict that you're resolving rather than 3 or 4, okay? Characters are basically the people in your story, including the main character, who's called the protagonist. Dialogue is what characters say to each other. Setting is where and when a story takes place. Point of view, tone, and style is the tone is the attitude toward the listener. The point of view is who and how the story is told. From whose point of view is the story told, and how is it told? Is it directly? Is it told indirectly? There's a lot of different changes to that. So let's talk a little bit about what the experts say about writing good fiction. So these are really important tips. Many of them are from a book called Ron Carlson Writes a Story. Ron Carlson, one of his short stories is in our anthology, and we'll be reading it next week. But he's an excellent writer. He actually often comes to the Napa Valley Writers Conference. He'll be there next summer, so hopefully you can come listen to him read in the Valley next year. But he's a really good teacher, and he wrote a book about how his process of going through writing a short story. So one of the most important things is to don't try to tell too many stories at once. A story that is too complicated uses up its energy just to explain what's happening. For example, if you spend the entire first page explaining where we are and everything about the character, the reader's going to get bored. They're not going to jump into the story. You want to really jump into the point of the story where the reader feels like they're entering into something and they're engaged right away. Don't write a last line that surprises the reader. This is important. This is a common mistake in creative writing. So you write this great story, this crazy situation, the reader's totally into it, and then you end it with, and then I woke up, right? That's such a disappointment to the reader. It's not a good way to end your story. Don't write about things you don't know about. That doesn't mean you can't research them and find out about them, but it's a really good idea to start from what you know. Don't write a story whose main point is that it is told from some unexpected point of view. Don't write stories that are simply idea-driven. Have people in your story. Have real humans in your story. And have their relationships be part of the conflict. Don't overpopulate your stories with characters, though. You only want 1, 2, maybe 3 characters in a short story. Don't give your characters names that sound similar, okay? You want the names. Names are actually really particular, because if you, for example, in our book they have the example of if you name your first character, your main character Jezebel, then it'll have some connotations, right? The idea of what Jezebel means to everyone when they see that name. So you want to use a name that you're conscious of the connotations that go along with it, okay? So think about that. And then you don't want like your characters' names to rhyme and stuff like that. The reader's always suspect about things like that. Don't spend the first 2 pages of your story explaining your story, okay? Don't outline or plan out your entire story. Let the story take you where it intends to go, and don't be afraid not to be driving the car. So don't be afraid to let the story drive the car and you're in the back seat. You want to write toward what you know, okay? A writer goes into a story with a dream or a vision that is the North Star, and an understanding of craft that is the footing, an instinct, passion that is the driving force. If an idea matters to you, then it is worthy of your exploration. If you don't want to read the story, it is not worth writing. So make sure that you choose something that you want to spend hours and hours on, okay? Because if you're going to write a really good short story, even if it's short story, it takes a lot of effort, just like a small poem does. All right, so let's talk about what makes up a story. In every story, there should be a protagonist, the main character, an antagonist, that's the person who causes place, or thing that causes a conflict for that character, and a setting, a time and place where it takes place. The story begins with an exposition. That's the statement of the situation of the story, where you tell us what the setting is, you give us the main characters. It doesn't have to be direct. It doesn't have to be once upon a time in a land far, far away, right? There was a knight named George. Don't be direct. You can just start describing, and we'll look at this in some of the examples. But in the first paragraph, the reader needs to know where they are and who's there with them, okay? Conflict or crisis. This is really important in a short story. The main crisis of the story usually involves complications and a main crisis action. So that means that immediately you want to reveal that there's something going on, okay? That something is keeping the protagonist from doing something. There's some conflict that is affecting the protagonist, and it's going to cause action or inaction even, based on that conflict. Following action is what happens as a result of the crisis. So this crisis is revealed, and then we watch what happens because of it. The resolution is how the story resolves. In many modern fiction stories, there is no resolution. Like there's no solution offered. The resolution is that the protagonist has to live with the conflict, right? It's the idea that sometimes things aren't tied up in a neat bow at the end. So there's a lot of different types of stories. We're going to talk about many different types of stories in this class. There's the story as a journey. That's the insider encountering the other. It's self versus the other. So and it must have a dynamic character. A dynamic character is a character who changes throughout the story. There's a story as a power struggle that's based on conflict, crisis, and resolution. That's protagonist versus antagonist, where both parties have equal force. So that's good versus evil, right? But you don't want to write that story. It can even happen within just the protagonist's mind, right? It's many of you might have seen the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, right? His conflict was within it's actually a short story, a great short story that it's based on. And that conflict was happening entirely in his mind, right? His fantasies were in his mind. All right, so you want to write what you know. There's fiction based on what you've observed. That's also writing what you know. It's not just writing what you know is not just, okay, so I'm a carpenter and I know all about building houses, right? That doesn't mean that you can only write about that. You can be someone who's, gone somewhere and observed something. Just like we did in creative nonfiction, you want to be like a reporter and really observe your world around you. So maybe you've observed what it's like to be a barista in Starbucks, even though you've never worked there, and you want to write about a character in Starbucks. So you want to probably spend some time sitting in Starbucks watching what the baristas do, right? There's also fiction written from research about topics that interest you. Okay, this is also what you know. So I have the example here, my Pithole example, right? I've written a novel about a city called Pithole, and I knew nothing about Pithole before I started doing research about this, this oil boom town that survived only 500 days in the mid 1850s, the mid 1800s. Sorry, I can't talk today. And then there's fiction written from your imagination, right? Just solely from your imagination. But if your fiction is to live, something deeply immediate and human must be at its heart, okay? You must have something passionate and human and immediate at the heart of what you're writing. So let's talk about some examples. A lot of that was abstract, you guys, just bear with me. In our book, we have 3 examples of short fiction. The first is a beautifully written short story called Crossing the River Zubres, and this is by Isaac Babel, and it was published in 1926. When you read this story, I want you to really pay attention to the description of the setting and the subtle way that he moves the plot along. The plot is, remember, what's taking place in the story, right? And the story begins with this long exposition of the setting, right? And these descriptions, right, of the setting are they're juxtapositions, right? You've got these beautiful flowers, right? But they grow from a place that was built on the slaughtering of people, okay? The moon, right? I mean, the sun looks like a severed head, right? You've got these details that are ominous, right? It's gorgeous. This area is beautiful. It's described beautifully, but at the same time, you know that bad things are happening there. But even without him saying, we're in the middle of a battle, people are dying, right? You don't have to say that. The landscape tells you that. It's beautifully written. Also, when the soldier actually goes to the house, and the conflict happens, right? The conflict happens very, very close to the end of the story, right? And he's gone into this house, and you don't actually feel you have a neutral connection with the protagonist, right, who's the soldier. But then he enters the Jewish home and he starts to describe things, and he doesn't have any empathy, right? And that's difficult because he just before this moment, right, he was describing these fields in such a way that you could tell he loved the beauty of what he was seeing. So he's a dynamic character, a round character, meaning he's human, right? Because he's both good and bad, right? We all have good and bad inside of us. So when he does realize that the person who he thinks is sleeping is dead, right? And the daughter ends by telling him, what her father did in his last moments. We don't get to hear his reaction. And this is a really, really bold way to end a story. But it really makes it slams the door shut on the reader in a way that makes us remember that moment. It makes it more poignant. So I want you to think about how it ends and what it makes you feel when it ends that way. That the soldier doesn't get to react. That man's greatest deed in that last moment of his life is what we remember in the end of that story. The second example is The Baby. And this is written by Donald Barthelme in 1983. This is a totally different type of story. And Bartholomew is really known for his almost hyperbolic plots, right? That set up the situations that are just so extreme they're ridiculous, right? I want you to pay attention to how he sets the setting and the crisis of the story within the first 3 sentences of the story. We know exactly what's going on, and we think that the speaker is just more and more crazy in his parenting tactics, right, as the story moves on. It's important to watch how he does this because he's writing in an extreme, but he's pulling it off, okay? The last story that we look at, and these first two are very short. This is about the length that you're going to be writing in this class. The last one is called We're on TV in the Universe. And this was written by Stephanie Vaughn in 1990. It's from her first collection of short stories. It's a brilliant collection. I want you to pay attention to how she tells the story, okay? This is a more complex telling, right? It starts with past events, and then it goes into the actual story of the car wreck, and then future events, the effects of this car wreck on the speaker of the story. You also want to pay attention to all the details she chooses to include in this story. The character who's sitting there talking to a chicken wearing a belt that plays the Star-Spangled Banner is quite an eccentric character, right? But we believe in her because of how it's set up, and also the way that she describes when she's actually in the moment of the wreck, the way she's thinking about the way the car is dancing, like it's dancing to rock and roll music rather than, oh my gosh, I might die and go into the frozen river. She's thinking about it in a very different way than we would expect. So it's very important to think about character in this story. Speaking of characters, let's talk a little bit about what makes a really good character. So characters are really the heart of your story. You want to keep it real. Imperfect people are okay because everyone around you is not perfect, okay? That's what makes people interesting. You want to make sure you're writing round characters as your main character, your protagonist. That means that they don't just have one thing about them. They're completely well-rounded, okay? Flat characters are just characters that have a single dimension to them. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but they just kind of help the other characters in the story along. You want a round character shows change over the course of the story. They start somewhere, and based on the conflict, they change in some way. It can be a change in their mind, or it can be a giant change. It can be a very subtle change. It can be a large change. Desire is really important to show in a story. You want to suggest complexity. Give the reader little hints throughout your story. The protagonist needs to desire something. They need to want something to happen, or they want to do something, be something. There's got to be something there that they're striving towards, and you want to suggest towards that in the story. Um, when you write characters, don't just write characters as an exact replica of those and say, well, I can't change it because that's who they are. You are writing fiction, okay? You can certainly take parts of people and Frankenstein them together, amalgamate people, take, um, the way you're, um, you know, the way that you walk, or your own funny mannerisms of what you say every time someone says something. Um, take your best friend's crazy driving. Put everyone together into one person. That's a really good way to write a character. Um, but don't be afraid to just invent someone based on people you see around you too, or 10 different people you see around you. You're writing fiction. You're not writing the truth, okay? You are making this up. This is very important in fiction, okay? You want to give your character sympathy, even if they aren't good people. You, as the writer, must sympathize with them in some way. You need to show that they're human, right? Even the worst people in the world are human, and you need to show that. When you name your character, you want to think about your name. And they don't even need to have names in all short stories, right? It can just be the girl, right? Or the dog, right? Um, when you're thinking about writing your character, you want to begin by brainstorming. You may not use this information in your story, but it'll really help you figure out who your character is and prepare you to write your short story. Here's some sample questions you can ask yourself about your character. These are also in your book. Where was your character born? How old is your character? What does your character look like? What type of music does your character like? What's your character's job? How does she get to work? What is his greatest dream and or biggest fear? What does your character want more than anything else in the world? All right, another very, very important part of your story, which is also revealed in the very beginning of your story in the exposition, is the scene, setting the scene. It's the setting of the story. Its setting is where and when a story takes place, and it's important for highlighting the characters and their conflicts. It's where this all takes place. You need as much specific detail and sensory detail as possible. I mean, what's brilliant about Babel's story is the way he describes that setting. Another amazing person who works with setting is John Steinbeck. If you've ever read The Chrysanthemums, the first paragraph of that short story describes the Salinas Valley in a way that describes the whole mood of the story. It's like this valley that's trapping this woman in her life. Setting can also work as a character. If you look in Jack London's short story To Build a Fire, it's set in the Yukon in a very, very cold, dangerous environment, and that setting is what is causing the conflict in the story. It's the antagonist of the story. In Kate Chopin's story, the storm is used also as something that causes the conflict within the story. Dialogue is another really important part of writing a good short story. It should be brief, and it should add to the reader's knowledge as they're reading it. Dialogue is really difficult to write because a lot of what we say in real life is boring, right? If you just sit around, go somewhere and listen to, I'm going to have you all sit at Starbucks this week, sorry. Obviously, I need a coffee right now. All of you guys go sit in Starbucks and just listen to all the conversations around you. 90% of what you hear is just rubbish. It's just, it's not pushing the plot forward in life, okay? So what you want to do is when you write dialogue, you're basically just boiling all that down to its essence and only giving us the dialogue that matters. So basically you just eliminate the routine exchanges of everyday conversation. There should be spontaneity there. It should be it should move the story forward. Everything that's said should move the story forward. It should tell the reader about the speaker's character, who they are. Tell us who they are by how they speak. And it should reveal relationships between people, how they react to one another. questions to ask yourself: do you have enough dialogue? Do you have too much dialogue? Does your dialogue sound like real speech? Have you clearly and unobtrusively tagged all speakers' dialogue? Do we know who's speaking when, right? But not too much, right? Pay attention to these tiny details because they really, really mean a lot in a story. All right, enough of me talking. Now it's time for you to try your hand at writing fiction. We're going to do this as a discussion forum again this week. You guys did a great job when we did this with creative nonfiction, with really being positive to your classmates for what they posted. I really appreciate that. It's such an important part of this class. I'd like you to do the same thing here. Remember, we're all just sitting down, and please just free write. This is a 10 to 15 minute free write. It doesn't have to be really good. It's just you trying it out, okay? It's just a warm up to get you going towards writing a short story, okay? So I want you to free write about a difficult conversation between two people, okay? Such as a daughter who doesn't want her mother to look in her backpack to see that she's gotten an F on her report card, but can't hide the fear in her voice, okay? Or a car of commuters who are all driving to work on the day there are to be layoffs, but no one knows who will lose their job, right? Let the conversation, words, and reactions reveal the tension of the situation. Use a setting that can also help reveal the crisis of the moment. Remember, you can just like Babel does, you can let the landscape talk about the tension that's there, right? Never reveal what the characters are actually talking about, okay? So this is tough, but I want you to try it. Your initial post is due July 18th by 11:59 p.m. That's Friday night. And your responses to your peers are due by July 21st at 11:59 p.m. Okay? Make sure that you respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts, and that, just like I said, you're really encouraging and we're all cheering each other on as we move towards this new genre. So we're going to look at 2 different story types we're going to practice writing this week. The first one is a facade. A facade tells an anecdote in the voice of a character who's not you. Okay, you're gonna use a character that becomes unreliable, right? A character that, for example, who we think is totally sane, but by the end it's revealed that that person is crazy. Okay, an example of this is Charlotte Perkins' The Yellow Wallpaper, and I have a link here to the short story if you want to check out how she wrote it. It's at first you think that the woman is totally sane and fine, and by the end you realize she's not. Okay, there should be this will really help you develop a character that's its own. That's developed through its own voice, because you'll have to make that person who that person is, and you really need to understand that person before you write about him or her, okay? There should be a discrepancy between the image that the character wants to project and what actually comes across, okay? So the character thinks they're one person, but what we as a reader perceive is very different, and that tension will create an interesting aspect to your story, okay? Another example is the iceberg. That's where you're going to write an argument in which the character's real feelings are not expressed. Arguments are central to fiction. They create tension and real character. What your characters don't say can be more important. Dialogue should be cryptic. That means it shouldn't reveal very much at all. Use all aspects of communications, okay? Don't just use the words that they're saying. Use the facial expressions, the body language, where they're moving in the scene. Setting is also another character, okay? A great example of this is the Hemingway story Hills Like White Elephants, and I have a link to it right here. So make sure you look at that example. So writing exercise number 9, I believe we're on number 9, is to try writing a facade. So you're going to spend time developing a character who's nothing like you. I really highly recommend doing free writing before you start writing your story. You don't have to include your free writing. You want to tell an anecdote in the voice of this character. As the character tells his or her story, have him unknowingly undercut or discredit his or her explanation. Okay? Needs to be 250 words. You want to make sure at least 250 words. You don't have to go long on this. It's just trying this out as a model. You want to make sure you begin your story at the right moment. Okay, don't have a long exposition telling us who this character is, who they dream of being, where they're at. Just put us in the middle of it and then describe it as you're there. Okay, and make sure the conflict of the story is very, very clear. This person needs or wants something, and we want to know what it is. Okay, that's your first writing exercise. Second is the iceberg. You've got 250 word story again, just one page, and just trying it out, where you write an argument in which the character's real feelings are not fully expressed. You want to use dialogue, but make it cryptic. Use all aspects of communication, facial expressions, body language. Remember, setting is another character. I want you to really work on your setting and use it to convey emotion in this story. All right, from those, I want you to develop one formal assignment. You can choose either one to develop into a story. It needs to be at least 500 words and have a title. I want you to really, really work on making sure that it's the best that it can be. I will be looking to see that there's a huge change between your writing exercise and your formal writing assignment. Okay? All right, I really look forward to reading your work. This has been so fun to teach you guys. You're doing a great job. Excellent work. I am also this week going to be posting a link to the Napa Valley Writers Conference. It takes place July 27th through August 1st. And you all can go to any of the readings for free as students. I know it's after our class is over, but I'd love to see you all there. It's so weird not to have met so many of you. I will be there all week, and there are craft talks, there are lectures by famous poets and fiction writers, and there's also readings every night at different wineries, and then also at the Performing Arts Center on campus on Wednesday night. So I will post a link to that schedule, and it does indicate that it costs money, but I will, if you bring your student ID, you'll be let in free, or if you contact me in advance, I can put you on the list to make sure that you are let in for free. You're not required to pay. It's a benefit of being a student of creative writing at Napa Valley College. All right, so this is, we have one more week after this, and then you'll be turning in your final portfolio. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about fiction and a lot about how to revise your work and get ready to create your portfolio. All right, guys, I look forward to seeing you online.